let me go back to the page. So we're just starting the Hiramic Legend. When Solomon, the beloved of God, builder of the everlasting house, and Grand Master of the Lodge of Jerusalem, ascended the throne of his father David, he consecrated his life to the erection of a temple to God and a palace for the kings of Israel. David's faithful friend Hiram, king of Tyre, that's Tyre, hearing that a son of David sat upon the throne of Israel, sent messages of congratulation and offers of assistance to the new ruler. In his History of the Jews, Josephus mentions that copies of the letters passing between the two kings were then to be seen both at Jerusalem and at Tyre. Despite Hiram's lack of appreciation for the 20 cities of Galilee, which Solomon presented to him upon the completion of the temple, the two monarchs remained the best of friends. Both were famous for their wit and wisdom, and when they exchanged letters, each devised puzzling questions to test the mental ingenuity of the other. Solomon made an agreement with Hiram of Tyre, promising vast amounts of barley, wheat, corn, wine, and oil as wages for the masons and carpenters from Tyre who were to assist the Jews in the erection of the temple. Hiram also supplied cedars and other fine trees, which were made into rafts and floated down the sea to Joppa, whence they were taken inland by Solomon's workmen to the temple site. Because of his great love for Solomon, Hiram of Tyre sent also the Grand Master of the Dionysiac architects. Shiram, that's with CH, Abith, a widow's son, who had no equal among the craftsmen of the earth. Shiram is described as being a Tyrian by birth, but of Israelitish descent, and a second Bezalel, that's Bezaleel, honoured by his king with the title of father. The Freemason's Pocket Companion, published in 1771, describes Shiram as the most cunning, skillful, and curious workman that ever lived, whose abilities were not confined to building alone, but extended to all kinds of work, whether in gold, silver, brass, or iron, whether in linen, tapestry, or embroidery, whether considered as an architect, statuary, founder or designer, separately or together, he equally excelled. From his designs and under his direction, all the rich and splendid furniture of the temple and its several appendages were begun, carried on, and finished. Solomon appointed him, in his absence, to fill the chair as Deputy Grand Master, and in his presence, Senior Grand Warden, Master of Work, and General Overseer of all artists, as well those whom David had formerly procured from Tyre and Sidon, as those Hiram should now send. Modern Masonic writers differ as to the accuracy of the last sentence. Although an immense amount of labour was involved in its construction, Solomon's Temple, in the words of George Oliver, was only a small building and very inferior in point of size to some of our churches. The number of buildings contiguous to it, and the vast treasure of gold and precious stones used in its construction, concentrated a great amount of wealth within the temple area. In the midst of the temple stood the Holy of Holies, sometimes called the Oracle. It was an exact cube, each dimension being 20 cubits, and exemplified the influence of Egyptian symbolism. The building of the temple group was ornamented with 1,453 columns of Parian marble, magnificently sculptured, and 2,906 pilasters decorated with capitals. There was a broad porch facing the east, and the Sanctum Sanctorum was upon the west. According to tradition, the various buildings and courtyards could hold in all 300,000 persons. Both the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies were entirely lined with solid gold plates encrusted with jewels. King Solomon began the building of the temple in the 4th year of his reign, on what would be, according to modern calculation, the 21st day of April, and finished it in the 11th year of his reign on the 23rd day of October. The temple was begun in the 480th year after the children of Israel had passed the Red Sea. Part of the labour of construction included the building of an artificial foundation on the brow of Mount Moriah. The stones for the temple were hoisted from quarries directly beneath Mount Moriah and were trued before being brought to the surface. The brass and golden ornaments for the temple were cast in moulds in the clay ground between Succoth and Zeradatha, and the wooden parts were all finished before they reached the temple site. The building was put together, consequently, without sound and without instruments, all its parts fitting exactly, without the hammer of contention, the axe of division, or any tool of mischief. Anderson's much discussed Constitutions of the Freemasons, published in London in 1723 and reprinted by Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia in 1734, thus describes the division of the labourers engaged in the building of the everlasting house. But Dagon's temple and the finest structures of Tyre and Sidon could not be compared with the eternal God's temple at Jerusalem. There were employed about it no less than 3,600 princes, or master masons, to conduct the work according to Solomon's directions, with 80,000 hewers of stone in the mountain, or fellow craftsmen, and 70,000 labourers. In all, 153,600, besides the levy under Adoniram, to work in the mountains of Lebanon by turns with the Sidonians, viz. 30,000, being in all 183,600. Daniel Sickles gives 3,300 overseers instead of 3,600 and lists the 3 Grand Masters separately. The same author estimates the cost of a temple at nearly 4,000 millions of dollars. The Masonic legend of the building of Solomon's temple does not in every particular parallel the scriptural version, especially in those portions related to Hiram Abif. According to the biblical account, this master workman returned to his own country. In the Masonic allegory, he is foully murdered. On this point, A.E. Waite, in his New Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, makes the following explanatory comment. The legend of the master builder is the great allegory of Masonry. It happens that his figurative story is grounded on the fact of a personality mentioned in Holy Scripture, but this historical background is of the accidents and not the essence. The significance is in the allegory, and not in any point of history which may lie behind it. Hiram, as master of the builders, divided his workmen into 3 groups, which were termed entered apprentices, fellow craftsmen, and master masons. To each division he gave certain passwords and signs by which their respective excellence could be quickly determined. While all were classified according to their merits, some were dissatisfied, for they desired a more exalted position than they were capable of filling. At last 3 fellow craftsmen, more daring than their companions, determined to force Hiram to reveal to them the password of the master's degree. Knowing that Hiram always went into the unfinished Sanctum Sanctorum at high noon to pray, these ruffians, whose names were Jubela, Jubelo, and Jubellum, lay in wait for him, one at each of the main gates of the temple. Shiram, about to leave the temple by the south gate, was suddenly confronted by Jubela, armed with a 24-inch gorge. Upon Shiram's refusal to reveal the master's word, the ruffian struck him on the throat with the rule, and the wounded master then hastened to the west gate, where Jubelo, armed with a square, awaited him and made a similar demand. Again Shiram was silent, and the second assassin struck him on the breast with the square. Shiram thereupon staggered to the east gate, only to be met there by Jubelum, armed with a maul. When Shiram refused him the master's word, Jubelum struck the master between the eyes with the mallet, and Shiram fell dead. The body of Shiram was buried by the murderers over the brow of Mount Moriah, and a sprig of acacia placed upon the grave. The murderers then sought to escape punishment for their crime by embarking for Ethiopia, but the port was closed. All three were finally captured, and after admitting their guilt, were duly executed. Parties of three were then sent out by King Solomon, and one of these groups discovered the newly made grave marked by the evergreen sprig. After the entered apprentices and the fellow craftsmen had failed to resurrect their master from the dead, he was finally raised by the master mason with the strong grip of a lion's paw. To the initiated builder, the name Shiram Abif signifies "my father," the universal spirit, one in essence, three in aspect. Thus the murdered master is a type of the cosmic martyr, the crucified spirit of good, the dying God, whose mystery is celebrated throughout the world. Among the manuscripts of Dr. Sigismund Bastrom, the initiated Rosicrucian, appears the following extract from von Welling concerning the true philosophic nature of the Masonic Shiram. The original word Shiram is a radical word consisting of three consonants: Shef, Resh, and Mem. Shef signifies Shama, the sun's light, i.e. the universal, invisible, cold fire of nature attracted by the sun, manifested into light and sent down to us into every planetary body belonging to the solar system. Resh signifies Ruach, spirit, air, wind, as being the vehicle which conveys and collects the light into numberless foci, wherein the solar rays of light are agitated by a circular motion and manifested in heat and burning fire. Mem signifies Majim, water, humidity, but rather the mother of water, i.e. radical humidity or a particular kind of condensed air. These three constitute the universal agent, or fire of nature, in one word. Shiram, not Hiram. End quote. Albert Pike mentions several forms of the name Shiram, including Kerm, that's K-H-I-R-M, Kerm, as in K-H-U-R-M, and Kur-Om, K-H-U-R-O-M. The latter ending in the sacred Hindu monosyllable Om, which may also be extracted from the names of the three murderers. Pike further relates the three ruffians to a triad of stars in the constellation of Libra, and also calls attention to the fact that the Chaldean god Baal, metamorphosed into a demon by the Jews, appears in the name of each of the murderers: Jubela, Jubello, and Jubelum. To interpret the Hiramic legend requires familiarity with both the Pythagorean and Kabbalistic systems of numbers and letters, and also the philosophic and astronomic cycles of the Egyptians, Chaldeans, and Brahmins. For example, consider the number 33. The first temple of Solomon stood for 33 years in its pristine splendor. At the end of that time, it was pillaged by the Egyptian king Shishak, and finally, in 588 BC, it was completely destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and the people of Jerusalem were led into captivity to Babylon. See General History of Freemasonry by Robert McCoy. Also, King David ruled for 33 years in Jerusalem. The Masonic order is divided into 33 symbolic degrees. There are 33 segments in the human spinal column, and Jesus was crucified in the 33rd year of his life. The efforts made to discover the origin of the Hiramic legend show that, while the legend in its present form is comparatively modern, its underlying principles run back to remotest antiquity. It is generally admitted by modern Masonic scholars that the story of the martyred Shiram is based upon the Egyptian rites of Osiris, whose death and resurrection figuratively portrayed the spiritual death of man and his regeneration through initiation into the mysteries. Shiram is also identified with Hermes through the inscription on the Emerald Table. From these associations, it is evident that Shiram is to be considered as a prototype of humanity. In fact, he is Plato's idea, or archetype of man. As Adam after the fall symbolizes the idea of human degeneration, so Shiram, through his resurrection, symbolizes the idea of human regeneration. Okay, and I think that would be a good place to stop because we're getting close to the end.
Okay.
And this is going to go on for a bit. So this might be a good place to stop.
Mark the place and we can pick it up next week.
I will do. Thank you.
So this latest story that you're in is something that is new to me completely. And Shiram or Shazam is what? A genie in a bottle?
Honestly, it's new to me because I'm not versed in Judaic scripture at all. So as I'm reading it, it seems familiar, but other than that, I don't really know.
Well, it's the same archetype as most religions. It's just a different one from another perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so many of these are, as it states here, they're allegorical, you know, they're encoded. And going back to I agree with you, education is sorely lacking. You know, this is probably why we're not taught Latin and Greek and Hebrew in schools, perhaps. Just like I've seen it said that in ancient days, it was the same, that the true knowledge was kept to the elect, to the kings and queens and the top ranks of the word's going right in my head, but I'm going to give it a modern one, the church of the time, that the people were told stories, you know, to believe in and given gods to worship, not knowing the truth. That not only were that they were all cosmological or natural phenomena and understandings of the oneness of everything, but even that, and I didn't know this, that it was all based on studies of the human form. Imagine
or so they say.
So
and
they
that's
say,
where
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that's getting me this time with this particular reading from Manley Hall is that the context of the stories that we've been through with Manley Hall in the last 3 or 4 months since you started reading have all been extremely familiar and just spun in a different sense. But as I've been reading, it's the same story from different perspectives. And now we're getting some new stories of the same story from yet another perspective that's a bit different. And what I'm seeing is that each of it is a push into an archetype rather than a morphogenic field. And the archetype is shaping the morphogenic field, and it's not to our benefit as humans in a morphogenic field to be forced into this particular archetype.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, look at all these civilizations that disappeared, apparently. Perhaps they disappeared because, as it's said by some, they did reach this knowing, this understanding enough in their morphogenic field, reach this understanding that they were spiritual beings and therefore were able to simply disappear from our view, without the death. And perhaps that's a natural progress. Perhaps as the archetype changes and the morphogenic fields change and collectives, morphogenic fields change, it's on a specific path, or at least a trend, back and forth. We'll get a bit of a game of snakes and ladders maybe, but a specific trend towards a destination of spiritual illumination. Maybe it doesn't need everybody to reach that, but enough people. For example, when they've done experiments that to discover that only 1% of a population needs to be focusing on something for it to affect that something in the community, like the weather or the crime rate,
Well,
healing.
what's just described as the 100th monkey effect.
Exactly, yeah. So maybe that's all it takes. It's all
I
interesting
believe
to think
it's
about.
actually it's a shift in frequency. And I think that when I was in the southwestern United States and visited the Hopi grounds at near Four Corners, where it's a desert area where Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado all come together, and I could physically feel the difference at the Hopi sites and could feel physical resistance from returning to the site, to the point where I was unable to go through the resistance and did not return to the site. But the frequency, once elevated, means that the lower frequencies and the upper frequencies don't have touch with each other, and that it might be that at higher wavelength, lower frequency, there's a status you can achieve where you are invisible to people in the current world as we are and how we are. So interesting. I'm not sure that I agree with Manley Hall's version of history, but for the person of allowing him to tell various different stories of his research from 100 years ago, fascinating. I mean, what you were reading today was some new material, some old material to me, but certainly spun in a completely different form than is normally presented.
Yeah.
And especially the earlier stuff in the show when we were talking about the definitions of up, down, and things like that.
Yeah.
And if you look, when he started talking about the symmetry of forms and the left being spiritual and the right being material, and then the right being offensive and the left being defensive, and you look at the current culture and the division of people into left and right, spiritualists and materialists, when in chemistry we don't have waves and particles, we have wavicles. But the idea of being a wave or a particle allows you to take a different form, and the explanations of wave natures are different from the explanation of particle natures. But virtually all of biology is explained in particle nature because the waves are dampened by the idea that there's so many of them overlapping that the volume, it doesn't make sense to treat biology as the same scale as chemistry, because the volume of the particulate in that world is what makes a difference.
Yeah.
So I was watching Max Egan yesterday, a video that was about an hour that was everything that you've been taught is wrong. And it gave me some perspectives on questioning parts of the narrative, but I'm going to need it to watch it again, because the first time I watch something that presents new stuff, I always take it at face value. And if I watch it a second time and I start interpreting what I took at face value against what I already know, my first impressions and my thought impressions sometimes differ. So there might be something more to that. Why don't you give out contact information for organizations, websites, and others that you're interested in having the listeners know to contact you?
Sure. The best way is through my YouTube channel, Amber's Place, or on my Facebook group, Amber's Place, and with an apostrophe, Amber's with an apostrophe, and that's probably the easiest way for listeners to contact me. If you're a Discord member, and you're a member of New Way, you can always message me on here. My username on Discord is Amber72. You can find
There's
me in
two
the
of you on Discord also, because your computer works differently than your phone.
Yeah, I've got 2 accounts, yes. So I've got the other one, which is just Amber, but my main one is Amber72, which I use most of the time. So either of those, Amber or Amber72. And so yes, that's the easiest ways to contact me. YouTube, Amber's Place, Facebook group, Amber's Place, or on Discord, look for Amber72.
All right. Thank you very much for being here again. I always appreciate my diving into the historical body of information as presented. And each time we go back and we come forth, we find new ideas and new different turnings. And I've noticed that with all the new information coming out on Tartary and the Tartarian Empire, that's not shape or form by Manley Hall and the information he's been putting out. It all has an explanation in the context that we knew the revelations of what they're spinning on us now.
Mm-hmm.
Do I still have you here?
Yes, you do. Yes, sorry. I just thought you were ending the show there.
Nope. Yeah, no, we've still got a couple moments left in the show.
Okay.
So we can talk about anything that we wish to talk about, related to either what we were reading or anything else going on.
I think what I've taken out of it is going to help me remember some information. I'm learning about the tarot. So although I do read tarot, I generally just use the book, but I'm trying to learn the patterns within it and the more esoteric significance of some things. And it's what I've learned today is going to help me remember about the different symbology for earth, water, fire, and air, and apply them to the cards. It's enabled me to understand more why those symbols are the symbols, not only for the 4 tarot suits, but for the seasons, the different astrological groupings, the actual what's the word, characteristics of man, applying to each one. Yeah, it's definitely going to help cement that. So I'm really pleased. I read what I read today, because it's the right timing. And these things tend to happen that way, don't they? These synchronicities.
Absolutely. And I think that the synchronicity of modern times is things that have to happen because they've happened before and they will happen again. but history tends to rhyme rather than repeat itself. And there are stages when we have control of our own manifest destinies. So, once again, thank you for reading today.
You're welcome.
This is the play on Steempunk Radio with 2 E's. And I'm Dr. Lenny Thyme. People can find me on steemit.com at Lenny Thyme. And we're done. I thought
Excellent.
we were going to be done about 12 seconds ago, but it didn't want to turn off.